So let's start with the soybean program and talk a little bit about what we're doing and what some other guys around the country are doing that are really having some success with soybeans. It all starts with picking the right seed. Now, you have to have genetics
that
give you that
Darren,
top-end yield potential.
I mean, let's be honest. Does it really make more than 5 bushels difference which beans you pick?
Yes, it does.
I don't think it does.
Yes, it does, but it doesn't make 50 bushel difference.
Right.
It's going to make 5 to 10 bushel difference. So you pick the right variety with good yield potential. Now, the other thing is you need the right defensive package. Now, if you've got soybean cyst nematodes in your area, you just have to plant a number that's going to protect you from soybean cyst nematodes. Or if you have sudden death syndrome that hits your part of the country, you have to have a variety that can tolerate that.
Let's step back just a little bit. If you're going to pick the right variety, what are you picking for? You're going to pick for iron chlorosis, all right? Well, if you would lower your soil pH, get your soil fixed, you won't have iron chlorosis in the first place. And several of these other issues that are out there, if you take care of your soil, if you feed the plant well, if you do all the other things right, then what I'm trying to say here, my whole point is, then the variety doesn't become that big a deal. And I don't care which variety you pick, as long as you're picking new genetics and the right trait, you should be getting real close to top yield or within 5 bushels one way or the other.
All right, so you get the right variety. Then what you need to do is use a good seed treatment. And when we start out with seed treatment, some guys will say, are you talking about an inoculant here, or a fungicide, or an insecticide? And I say, yep, all of those.
Yep. Yeah, and to take it one step further, other biological products too. So on our farm, we've got all 4 of those things in there, and our grand total cost is maybe, what, $13? You know,
yeah,
I mean, it's a bushel of beans.
It's not that much, but it's very critical to do this, because you say, okay, hold on, you just told me that yield's going to get determined late in the season with fertility available and some moisture, and yeah, that's going to have a big part of it, but if you don't set the table right, you aren't even going to make it there. So you've got to have a good start. You have to protect yourself from early season diseases so you don't have problems later on.
All right, the 2 big things that I see in a lot of fields that should add up to 20 bushels or more, number 1 is drainage, number 2 is fertility. So if you don't have good drainage in your field, you're going to do nothing but fight it all the time. And I often talk to farmers about tiling, and I say, you know, I really honestly believe that tiling helps soybeans even more than it helps corn, and we already know it helps corn a lot. So that's one of the reasons why on our farm we were able to bump our yields as much as we have been, because we don't have those bad areas where we're only getting 20 bushels. Now every area is yielding 60 bushels across the field. That's fun. Coming back to the fertility thing, you gotta address fertility. And I talk to so many farmers. I'd be willing to bet you it's 90% of farmers or more that are putting on all their fertilizer in the corn, they're putting on no fertilizer in the soybeans, and they're hoping that enough is left over from the corn. But when I talk to most guys and say, well, what are you getting for corn yields? And then I ask them how much fertilizer they're putting out there, what I figure out, the fertilizer you put out there got all used up by the corn. What was left for the soybeans? Not much. It's real simple. If you don't feed the crop, there's no way you can expect good yield.
If you want high yielding soybeans, you probably have to add some nitrogen in your fertility program, in addition to having just an unbelievable amount of rhizobia bacteria on those roots to feed that engine. Because if you want to get 100 bushel soybeans or more, you've got to have plenty of nutrition there.
All right, let's come back to that nutrition. What we would encourage you to do is on your iPad or your iPhone, just download the free Ag PhD fertilizer removal app, and you can see how much a good corn crop or a good soybean crop would remove from the ground. But what we're talking about with soybeans, and I'll just tell you, in our farm we're using a lot of P and K, and especially K. Keep in mind that just for the grain only, the soybean crop uses almost double the amount of potassium that it does compared to phosphorus. So, I mean, it's a tremendous requirement for potassium, and a lot of people just don't even realize that. In addition, don't forget about the micronutrients. Probably will only cost you $5 or $10 an acre, grand total. That's it. It's no big expense, but if you don't do it, you're probably not going to get that last 2 to 5 bushels.
Okay, now in crop, we've got a number of things. When it comes to weed control, Roundup ready, or Roundup resistant weeds, I should say, are really spreading across our country. So we like to start with 2 or 3 different pre-emerge herbicides to make sure that we can stop as many of those small-seeded broadleaf weeds as possible.
Yeah, but it's not just starting with 2 or 3, it's starting with the right ones. So for example, I've talked to a lot of farmers here just lately that have said, well, I want to put some Flexstar in the soil, or I want to put some First Rate in the soil. You know, there are all these combination products that have Flexstar or First Rate, and you can put them in the soil and they'll work fine. But the thing is, they are our very best options post-emerge for certain weeds. So what we prefer to do is save those options, save the Flexstar and First Rate for use post-emerge. So use something different. And what we do on our own farm is we'll use one of the Authority or Valor products. And I really like throwing a little bit of metribuzin or the old Sencor out there. You don't have to use much. If you've got high pH ground, use 1/6 of a pound per acre. You don't have a whole lot of risk. It's dirt cheap, $1.50, $2 an acre, and it adds a little kick to the Valor Authority. And then on top of that, use Treflan, Sonaline, or Prowl. So you get 3 different modes of action, all for probably, again, $12, $13 an acre, not that much money. One other big thing I always like to talk to people about is spraying insects and spraying for diseases timely. If you don't spray timely, you're going to have problems because you've allowed bugs to feed for quite a while on your plants. You're going to have more problems with disease, and you're just going to have more yield loss. So when we talk about bugs like soybean aphids, bean leaf beetles, grasshoppers, and whatever insect you're dealing with, if it's a harmful insect to soybeans, spray early. Insecticide's dirt cheap. We're talking $2, $3 an acre for the full rate. Costs almost nothing. And you can tank mix it with a lot of herbicides. Same thing with fungicide. Most fungicides can be tank mixed with most herbicides if you're out there. But I will just tell you, on our farm, we've been spraying insecticide and fungicide for many years now in soybeans, and it adds several bushels per acre.
The other thing we're doing is trying to add a little punch at the end. We're using things like Mega Grow and AC97 that have growth promotants in them to try and push some more fertility in that plant, convince that plant that everything is good and it needs to hang on to every pod that it can possibly make. And those kind of things are giving us some good yield response as well. Now, in your area, you may have other yield limiting factors. If you don't have your fertility program right, it's probably not going to do you a lot of good to try some foliar things because you know what? You've already given up a lot of that potential to begin with. But if you've got a good program going, then those foliar apps can certainly help as well.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot of products you can use, techniques you can use, things you can do to increase yield on your farm. And you might say, well, I don't want to spend another $25, $30 an acre on soybeans. And what we talk often about here in Ag PhD is forget about expense. The word expense should not even be in your vocabulary. It should be the word investment. And with every one of these things that we talked about, whether you believe what we're telling you or not, I don't care. Try these things out on your farm. That's how we proved it to ourselves. We did trials for several years, split the planter on things, did strips through our fields with sprayers. We did all kinds of testing work, and we've just found a lot of these things to pay. But that's what we encourage you to do. Try a lot of different things out. If you're not trying new things, then chances are your neighbor is trying things and he's getting ahead of you, and you don't want your neighbor to get ahead of you. Try some new things out. Do some different things on your farm, and don't be afraid to invest a little bit of money in your soybean crop. It can really pay off.
All right, well, here's the way I look at it. You don't want to do all those things on all your ground because you're going to spend too much money. You're going to invest unwisely. So what you need to do is take one thing and say, you know what, I'm going to try that pre-emerge program, and I'm going to do that on some of my acres and see what difference that makes.
Yeah,
and then I'm also going to try doing, one other thing on these other acres, and then you can see how changing one input impacted your yield. So now all of a sudden you figure, wow, using those pre's, that added 10 bushels to my yield. Great. Well, changing this up with how I did my insect and disease spraying, that added another 5 bushels in this other field. And then next year, you put both those things together and hope that you get close to 15 bushel difference. And that kind of stuff can really make an impact on your farm over time. Don't try and do it all at once because it's going to be too tough to manage.
Okay, so none of this stuff is going to work though, unless you control our weed of the week. It can be a tough one to stop. Can you identify this week's weed?